Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the April 22nd, 2013 special meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority. First, I would ask everyone to place your cell phones on silent or vibration. And then I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przinski.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. If you would please stand and join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ask the town attorney for the closed session report.
Thank you. The council met in closed session tonight as duly noticed on the agenda. They met on 2 items and took no action on either item. There's nothing to report out.
Thank you. If anyone wants to address us this evening on anything, either verbal communications or something on the agenda, if you would please fill out one of these cards and submit it to the clerk. Some of you already have. So the next item on our agenda is verbal communications. No one has submitted a card to me to speak on verbal communications. Is there anyone who wishes to address us? Noting for the record that no one is coming forward. We will go to public hearings. Agenda item 1. And I will read this into the record. This is a plan development application PD 11006, negative declaration ND 11008, architecture and site application S 12098. The project's location is at 219 Bean Avenue. This is to consider a request to adopt the negative declaration ND 11008 and adopt the mitigation monitoring plan. B, to consider a request to approve plan development application PD 11006 to rezone from R1D to C2 to R1D PD. And lastly, to consider a request to approve architecture and site application S12098. I understand that I have some input from council members. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I am going to be recusing myself this evening because I sold some property that was located within 500 feet of this project.
All right, and we will be expecting you back for the next agenda item. Do we have other disclosures? Yes, Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to disclose that I'm a member of St. Mary's Parish and for several years served on the Pastoral Council, but I have not been active in that role since 2008. I have no direct contact with the school. My daughter never attended there, and I have not financially contributed to the school building campaign.
Thank you. Other disclosures? Seeing none. The staff report today is going to be made by Jennifer Savage. I will note for the record that we have received from the public and from the applicant, no, just from the public actually, several communications over the past week. They are desk items. Staff is prepared to address those items, but so that everybody knows what we have and how staff has addressed it, I will ask Ms. Savage to include that in your report. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. On March 13th, 2013, the Planning Commission reviewed the project and recommended approval of the project, subject to some modifications. Those modifications are included in your staff report as modifications to the conditions. In addition, the Planning Commission also recommended revisions to the applicant's revised elevations for the new junior high school. This consisted of modifying the elevation along the Victory Lane to include some brick elements to break up the two-story look of the Victory Lane elevation. In regards to the desk item that you have before you this evening, there were 2 additional public comments that were received over the weekend and today, and they addressed some of the concerns that were raised at the Planning Commission and some additional concerns as well. Those concerns have been or will be addressed depending on that concern and depending on the point of the project, whether it be now or at the building permit stage. Conditions of approval were modified regarding traffic and construction traffic, and those conditions include a traffic control plan, a construction management plan, and a neighborhood construction communication plan. The modifications include that there will be a point of contact provided by the applicant, including a phone number, and that point of contact and number will be provided to the neighbors when that is established and prior to construction. In the same manner, there will also be a neighborhood meeting prior to construction if the project is approved. The conditions were also modified so that construction employees were not allowed to park on residential streets, and that at least half of the employees were to be bused into the construction sites to reduce the amount of construction traffic on the residential streets. Although we don't have a traffic route plan at this time, the applicants have been diligently working towards one and do have a preliminary one that we can look at tonight. However, staff has not evaluated this plan, and it would be evaluated at a later point in time along with the grading and building permit plans. In regards to speeding and distracted driver concerns, the concerns were forwarded to the police department, and the police department has been made aware of those. The Planning Commission also recommended a condition that the school provide an annual report to the town that includes the number of students and the number of staff that the school and church are operating with. Staff did not include these in the recommended performance standards in your staff report this evening due to the fact that it would be difficult to keep track of those reports, and there is no reporting mechanism at this time. The applicant includes a summary of community benefit that the church and the parish do provide to the community. However, this is a unique scenario where if you look at the existing conditional use permit compared with the proposed project, there is a change in traffic. But specifically compared to today, there would not be a change in the number of students and staff that they actually operate with and have been operating with for several years, and thus there would be no change in traffic. However, as stated previously, the applicant is proposing community benefit that the church and the school does provide. The plan development before you tonight would replace a conditional use permit. There would be no conditional use permit document that would regulate the uses. Rather, it would be the plan development ordinance itself that would regulate uses on the site. The hours of operation in the plan development ordinance before you tonight were taken from the applicant's letter, which is also proposed to be included in the plan development. However, staff has been made aware today that there are some activities that do occur past the hour of 9:30 p.m. and that performance standards should be considered to be revised this evening. Special events are defined by town code, and should St. Mary's hold any special events by church or school that fall into that definition, they would be required to obtain a special event permit. There was a question on the number of staff that right now the performance standard includes a maximum number shared between the school and the church. If the church itself wanted to increase the number of staff on site, the plan development would need to be modified to increase that. If there was the desire of the town council to include some flexibility within that staff level, there is the opportunity to modify that performance standard so that it says at any given time after the existing sentence, so that if the school staff were not on site, there would be the opportunity for additional church staff to come on site. There were typos in the modified performance standards provided in your staff report, and those typos are corrected as noted in your desk item. And finally, the mitigated negative declaration that is proposed to be adopted before you tonight is part of Exhibit 1 of Attachment 1, and it is that document that's proposed to be adopted along with the mitigation monitoring plan. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Questions of staff? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Recently, we've spent a lot of time with questions about CUPs that were issued a long time ago, and concerns have come up now, and we've been, not me, you've been spending a lot of time going back through the files trying to put together what was really meant by the wording. So it's made me even more diligent about looking at the wording there, because I'm looking ahead 10 years or 15 years from now. The council then, and Mr. Brzezinski will still be on the council, I imagine, at that time, so he can remember. But you know, as they look at this, are they going to be able to figure it out? Are they going to be left with the mess that we've had. So the three that I'm questioning is the three that you mentioned that were in the desk items. So it's number one about the hours of operation, and my concern on that was not with the hours of operation, but, and I'll give you all three, and then you can answer all three. Is it wise to reference an applicant's letter rather than just having clear wording right there, so it's not another piece of paper to have to go find? The second one is on special events. And again, I'm looking ahead and could see that someone would say some of the events that are listed in the applicant's letter as use of facilities by community groups, like the crab feed and the Chipino feed and things like that, are those special events that all of a sudden, I don't think they get special event permits now, but maybe they do. So I know the technical definition that you gave us in town code for a special event, but it's a little hazy for me, so I was questioning that. And then on the number of staff, is that number of bodies or is that FTE? And I have another segment of the question on staff, but that's going to be for the applicant. So those are my concerns. If you are 10 or 15 years from now, you're the staff person that's being questioned about these, is this wording really right to help us, that council help them through figuring that out?
Thank you for those questions. We appreciate it. So for first, the hours of operation, in consideration that those may need to be modified this evening, specifically in regards to your question about the letter, it is staff's intent to include the letter as part of the plan development, so when the questions do come up in the future, we can refer back to that letter and have the history of uses that are listed in that letter. That history of uses doesn't necessarily encompass every single use that would be on site, but rather provides ample examples of uses that are typically occur on the campus and have been for a number of years. So from staff's perspective, it would help staff in the future to have that as a reference so that we could use that if a question came up 10 years from now to know what had been occurring on site, to have those specific examples listed and then compare that back to the town code that talks about intensifications of use and whether that triggers a CUP modification or in this case a modification of the plan development.
So can I just ask a question? So instead of having to find a separate letter in the file somewhere, it would all be part and parcel of the same package in the PD?
Correct. So along with the zoning map exhibit, that change, as well as the
pretty
development.
much all of this stuff here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And alternatively, you could write in to the performance standards each piece of that letter, but we find it easier and more helpful to include that full description that the applicant has provided in their letter. If there was anything in that letter that would not be supported to continue to be permitted or to be permitted in the future, we would recommend that that be written into the performance standards as not allowed, just to be clear that there is a difference between the whole use of the letters, the applicant's letter, and anything that we would not support. In relation to the special events, there is at least one event that occurs on the campus of St. Mary's that is considered a special event. There are events such as the crab feed that wouldn't fall into the category of special event, but then there are events such as, I believe it's the county fair. That may not be. Country fair, thank you, that occur on campus, which draws in a very large crowd, much larger than something like a crab feed, that more significantly impacts the residential neighborhood and requires police notification so that they can be aware of the event and incorporate any staffing level changes that they would need to handle anything that comes up from that event. So from the question about the special event, we could, to be very clear in the language of the performance standards, list what we know to be special events today. And that would then make clear in the future that we knew of some events that the school and parish do put on that currently today fall into the definition of a special event. Alternatively, we could choose not to revise the existing language of the performance standard that refers directly to the town code for special events, so that if any question of an event came up, we would just refer directly to the town code.
So let me, if I might just respond to that. Thank you. So I don't think we want to try to list everything because, again, I'm trying to figure out, again, a decade from now, if they're saying, someone says, well, they're doing a basketball tournament, for example, in the gym, is that a special event? If it's fully, again, the language on definition of special events kind of loosey-goosey for me, but if it's fully contained within a building and it doesn't touch the public facilities and it doesn't bring in a huge crowd, however you define huge, then it's not considered a special event.
That's the gist of it, yes.
Okay, well, we'll have to work that one through. Okay.
And then, sorry.
Go ahead.
Lastly, the number of employees are the actual bodies, not the FTEs. That was revised at the Planning Commission meeting.
Okay.
Other questions? Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Savage, I had a question regarding your oral presentation on the reporting requirement that the Planning Commission suggested, which was for the school to file an annual report on the number of students, et cetera, and you indicated that, I think, that staff would be recommending against that because you didn't have a formula in place to allow that to happen. And if I'm correct in that, does the town council have the authority to add a condition which would require the CUP to go back before the Planning Commission annually, where they would actually present that report to the Planning Commission as a way of monitoring their compliance with CUP?
To answer the second part, we certainly could put in a performance standard to require that reporting. The trouble comes to the point of it where it's consistent at one report every year. That part is difficult at this time. Our resources don't allow us to track and make sure that it comes back before us every single year, though the town manager may have additional information to add.
Mayor and members of the council, first it would be a PD report coming back to the Planning Commission every year, since it would no longer be a CUP. We are updating a CUP enforcement system, and you'll be seeing that discussed in the proposed budget on May 20th for a potential allocation of resources to create the CUP monitoring program that we discussed in your last code enforcement. This would be a novel piece with the plan development, having a reporting requirement coming back, that if the council added that condition to the action tonight, staff would find a way to implement it.
Thank you. Further questions? Then a few things. First of all, let's go on. We were just talking about the PD compliance provision that the Planning Commission sent up. While we go through the public hearing, I would ask staff to give thought to how that could be encompassed in this approval, in the sense of not only having the report made to the staff, but if either the report's made to the staff or the report's made to a public body like the Planning Commission, if it's made to the staff, that it goes to a public body if the applicant is out of compliance. So just give some thought, because I will be circling back to that. Then I had a couple questions about what you were saying, Ms. Savage. Did you say that the applicant needs to provide a community benefit or does not need to provide one but has anyway? I wasn't sure what you were saying.
It's a great question. Because we are in this unique scenario where they are not going to change the numbers from today to tomorrow if the project were approved. In that sense, there is no required community benefit due to the fact that the numbers would be the same today and tomorrow. However, in the evaluation that staff has to make between the existing conditional use permit and the proposed numbers, which are today's numbers, there is the difference in the number of traffic trips that would require community benefit. There is a performance standard within the plan development ordinance that does say that community benefit is required, and the applicant has offered that community benefit.
Are you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then, again, clarification, the Planning Commission wanted some type of softening of the east wall. I believe, if I recall correctly, they deferred the design of that to the applicant and staff. As I further understand what you were saying, there is a redesign that is back before us now. Is that correct? And if so, how would that be encompassed within the PD?
There is a revision to the revised elevation presented to the Planning Commission. The elevation presented to the Planning Commission on the Victory Lane side had no brick. It was only the stucco siding. The applicant worked with staff and provided some brick elements, some brick trim on the first story of the Victory Lane elevation to match the elevations proposed and recommended for approval by the Planning Commission on the remaining elevations. Staff believes that this meets the recommendation and intent of the Planning Commission, and if you wanted to incorporate those elevations into the plan development tonight, you could propose to add an additional performance standard noted in your desk item that the elevations shall match those elevations titled as the reduced brick option.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Jensen.
I'm sorry, one more question. In the Planning Commission report that we received as part of our original packet, it discussed in detail the parking that St. Mary's has, and one of the parking was a credited parking space, I believe, in the parking district. So I'm curious, are they a member of the parking district? Are they contributing to the parking district? And if they're not, how are they getting the credit? And could we require them to become a member, even though it's expiring?
There is one of 3 properties that the St. Mary's has that currently houses the existing junior high school building. It is known as 59 Victory Lane, and that property is currently located in the parking assessment district. It has 1 on-site parking assessment district space and 6 credits within the district. That small amount of property, small parcel compared to the rest, although it would be merged with one of the larger parcels that St. Mary's owns, that part would still remain in the parking assessment district. They would still have the 6 parking credits and would still provide 1 parking assessment district space on site.
Ms. Jensen?
The financial aspect of my question you didn't answer. Are they contributing to the parking district through that property to get the credits for that space?
The property has already or is continuing to provide.
Let me follow up then with Ms. Jensen's questions because I hadn't thought about that. The parking assessment, parking spaces that are provided by the applicant, are these specific to the property, or to the applicant, or are they public places, or both?
They are specific to the 59 Victory Lane property.
So I couldn't go park on there if I was not part of 59 Victory Lane?
No, it is not part of public, not part of a public parking lot.
Thank you. All right, further questions? Now I see no further questions, and what we will do is we will start with the applicant. The applicant will have 10 minutes. If the applicant is represented by more than 1 person, then you will have collectively 10 minutes. So if the applicant would please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Berg, 60 Pierce Avenue, San Jose, California. I'm the architect for St. Mary's Parish and School. So thank you. Good evening, members of the council, ladies and gentlemen, and the public. Tonight it's a happy night for us. We're very happy to be here. It's been a year and a half now that we've been on a journey to really improve the school's facilities and the kind of the outdated buildings. If you know, the lower school building there was built in the 1950s, along with that first phase of development. And there hasn't been really, in terms of really changing of the school and the school classroom environment done since then. They have been able to add and build the junior high school rooms, which is staff has noted as the 59 Victory Lane building. And as part of this application, the new junior high school building will kind of replace that aging facility. Again, that was just it's a one-story kind of a warehouse type building that really has been housing the 8th grade and science lab and library. So they've been kind of making do with facilities. So tonight, I think, is the kind of end of this journey, we hope, I think, for working on this expansion. And it really, I think, brings us to equivalent to a lot of the work that the town has done with their bond program in terms of the public school facilities. So we have been working with staff over that time to address a number of the concerns through the town's consultants, the town architect, the Public Works Department, and then especially recently, since the Planning Commission hearing, was the parking and construction-related traffic. I have one exhibit here to put up on the overhead. So at the Planning Commission hearing, a lot of focus was put on the construction-related traffic and access. And the applicant has spent some time over this past month to look at how we could park on the site and to really accommodate people on site rather than into the residential streets. So we found about 20 spaces on site to handle construction-related traffic on a daily basis. Four are in the lot that you see next to Howley Hall. The rest are really into the construction area, the fenced area, all around the little building that's called Cougar's Corner on Bean Street. It's not utilized for parking, but that area is going to be disturbed during construction, so we feel very comfortable about putting the construction traffic in there. And this is the exhibit. I'm not sure if it was handed out originally. No, okay, so this might be the first time you're seeing that. So there's the 4 spaces here that are in the existing lot, and then the bulk of the others would be right and clustered in here with our construction fence really running along this part of the site. So I think I wanted to reemphasize that we're more than willing to work with Public Works in the grading. I think when they release and we go through the grading permit process, to work with their department on the haul routes and in the other, I think, items that are fairly standard in that process with the contractor and Public Works to bring that, at least that portion, to satisfaction to the town. And then other items at the Planning Commission, you do see the revised elevation. We had proposed a reduction in a lot of the brick that was originally contained in the town's architectural consultant. And we had some feedback at that hearing that it would be beneficial to probably put some more material, especially on the Victory Lane side, to add some brick onto that elevation, which we have. And then we've added it onto the corners to kind of mimic more of the existing buildings that are on the site, primarily Howley Hall and the church building. So that is the balance of our presentation. More than happy to answer questions tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions of the speaker? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Berg, could you run through for me again the number of employees for the school and the number for the church and it's not FTE, apparently it's actual
Yeah.
bodies.
We have a total of 53, and I will have to ask a representative from the church to come down on the actual split of staff between the school and the parish. Okay? Maybe Karen or Sister Karen, maybe? I think just the split, the split between.
And if you'll identify yourself, please.
I'm Karen Larson, 16795 Leroy Avenue in Los Gatos. I'm the principal of St. Mary's School. We have 9 full-time teachers, and I believe we have 19 part-time staff, either part-time teachers or aides, resource teachers.
Does that answer your question, Ms. McNutt?
I can't
does.
address the parish, but I can tell you what we have at the school.
Well, if I did the math, I could subtract and get the other. So, my follow-up question, if I might, Mayor, to someone, is because this is very specific on 53, is the school and the parish confident that there won't be more transition, as there has been over the last few years, from volunteer to staff? Or, I mean, are you really comfortable with this number? Because people will be counting and will be back.
Yeah, I think we're very confident that we are at a static space, and I think parish could speak to the same thing, that we do not see any need to make any changes in staff. And we know, at least for the next year out, that we are not changing any numbers.
Okay, this lasts a whole lot longer than a year.
Oh, I
That's
know.
okay.
I can't,
Remember, I'm looking 10 years out.
We're not in any position to increase the numbers of students in our school at all. We want to stay very static at a maximum of 35 in the classroom, so we see no change to increase staff as well.
Yes, and I wanted to add that too, because of the conditions in the PD. There is a maximum number of 315 students. So obviously, I think the school teaching staff would be equivalent to support that number of children. We're not allowed to go over the 315.
I understand. I just, the way that you deliver education changes sometimes. And so I remember in the Planning Commission transcript, Sister Nikki was talking about used to be one nun for 50 kids, and now you have reading specialists, math specialists, and science specialists, and, things change. So since it's not FTE, it's bodies, I just am trying to keep us out of trouble in the future, because we get in enough trouble on other places.
All right, any other questions, Ms. McNutt?
I think Father Rick wanted to comment on that.
Father Rick Rodoni at 219 B Avenue, Los Gatos. In answer to the question about parish staff, an interesting way you put it was that, from volunteers to staff, it seems that it's in reverse now. We're looking for more volunteers, and we're finding them. So, and there's not that there's been a reduction in staff, but there's going to be changes in staff. And that's a regular occurrence for the parish.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you. You'll have the opportunity to address us for, I think, 5 minutes at the end, if you need that much time.
Thank you.
Again, anyone wishing to talk to the council or testify, please submit one of these cards. I do have a couple cards here, starting with Todd Mendez, who will be followed by Lisa Hogan.
Hi, my name is Tad Mendez. I live at 216 Loma Alta Avenue in Los Gatos. I am a third grader in St. Mary's and a Los Gatos resident. I am here to ask for your consideration regarding the proposal for our new science building. We are a community school and taught the importance of being good students as well as good neighbors. My friends where I live attend public school that were fixed up recently with help from residents and public funds. Our money was privately collected to fix badly needed repairs. I know there are concerns related to noise and traffic. I cannot promise to stop that. I can promise that I will do all that I can to raise awareness and remind students and parents alike to be courteous and safe. A better school benefits everyone in the neighborhood. Thanks again for your consideration, Tad.
Thank you. And do we have questions for Mr. Mendez? We do not. Lisa Hogan. Lisa Hogan, followed by Edward Stahl.
Probably leave the mic right where it was at, huh? Good evening. My name's Lisa Hogan. I live at 1 Masal Court in Los Gatos. Oh, sorry. My name's Lisa Hogan. I live at 1 Masal Court in Los Gatos, and I'm here tonight to represent Los Gatos Parent Nursery School, which is located at 15 Linden Avenue. It's a side street that accesses St. Mary's School, and it's currently used as a pickup and a drop-off area now. Our school services about 52 to 5-year-olds every day, and we are concerned about the increased construction traffic. It's already a safety issue with speed and people and volume, and we just wanted to have you guys take us into consideration during the construction process and the planning for off-site parking and busing. Thank you.
Before you leave, there's been further input from the staff this evening relating to construction parking. Have you heard that? And if so, do you have any further input?
We would just like to request to be included in the parking meetings, the neighborhood meetings, and yes.
Thank you. Edward Stahl, followed by Amy Despars.
I guess that's about the right height. Good evening, all. I'm Ed Stahl, member of the Parking Commission, and I've been with it since its inception. The council must address the parking needs. When it comes to parking, I fear that we are heading for the perfect storm. The theater is going to need more parking. St. Mary's is short of spaces and definitely needs a new plan for the additional spaces, parking spaces that it needs. Regarding the phantom spaces in the town at some point needs to certainly build these. In December, the parking district goes away. Does that mean the end of the parking requirements? A lot of people think it does. The town in 1999 paid over $200,000 for the downtown parking structure feasibility. It should be revived. We are, with the improving economy, heading for gridlock and all the problems that go with it. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Stahl? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Amy Despars, followed by Don Imwal.
Hi, my name's Amy Despars, 267 Long Ridge Road, Los Gatos. I'm a parent. I'm a teacher here in the community at Blossom Hill School. I also have children at St. Mary's School. I'm here asking that you let St. Mary's do this remodel. All children in this town get to have amazing schools like we do at the Los Gatos Union School District. They're not asking for more students like Hillbrook's asking. They're just asking to remodel and modify. And I do know there are remarks from neighbors in regards to talking on cell phones, construction parking, let's see what else was quoted here, congestion, blocking streets, speeding. And it is so sad for me to stand here and have to say, it is at every school in this town, and all parents really should be aware of this, not just the St. Mary's parents. So I'm sorry that you live in an area where there is going to be a remodel, but all Dave's Avenue parents had to deal with it. Van Meter parents are still dealing with it. Fisher parents, neighborhoods went through it. Blossom Hill parents went through it, and we all really worked together. And I know that St. Mary's is really willing to work with the town, really willing to work with the neighbors. And I just think everyone needs to be aware that it's really a chronic problem here in town. It's not just St. Mary's School. I've had parents back into teachers because they wouldn't move while they were doing yard duty. I have parents make illegal U-turns right in front of me when I'm pulling into a parking lot at Blossom Hill School. I have parents drive over crosswalks and through cones where it says no parking while kids are walking into school. So this isn't an unusual concern. I think we live in a small community, and I think we just all really need to work together. But really, I think all children in this community deserve to have a new facility to help support them. I mean, it's made all the difference in Los Gatos schools.
Thank you. Don Imwall, followed by Barney Davidge.
Hi, my name is Don Imwally. I'm on 118 Masol Avenue. I have a son who's a first grader and another who will be entering kindergarten at St. Mary's. Prior to entering the school system, we looked at your beautiful public schools here and chose St. Mary's. We've been happy with that, and a big part of that was also seeing this new facility come and modernize from structures that are 60 years old. I work in the commercial real estate industry where I see DevCon's product again and again, and there really is not a finer tier of contractor out there. And if they say they can manage the traffic problems, they will. And I think that when you compare the flexibility that St. Mary's has to work within their own site and rear lane access, and then compare to a zero lot line project like the theater building and the challenges that they'll certainly overcome, I think that the community's concerns are well-founded, but that ultimately St. Mary's and DevCon will prevail with a plan that satisfies both council and the residents like myself that live within a block of the school. Insofar as traffic and parking, I've heard stories of what Los Gatos used to be when there were a lot more restaurants or bars in downtown, and being just 3 blocks off downtown, we're rarely ever crowded on Masol. So I'm sure that with your support, the school and DevCon will be able to manage traffic issues in the Almond Grove district. Thanks.
Thank you. Barney Davidge, followed by Jennifer Scott.
Hi, I'm Barney Davidge at 116 Tate. I'm sort of with Ed on the parking. Been there 30 years on Tate. Actually, I know a lot of the St. Mary's people too, because we go to St. Mary's. I've done a lot of work for St. Mary's, but I'm concerned about the parking, and hopefully you'll put in part of the plan that they do have to meet those expectations of employees parking off-site and not on the streets. We already have problems with all the employees from downtown parking on Tate, especially in the section that does not, allows parking all day long. And I have trouble parking my car a lot in front of my house since there's I can try to park in the alleyway, but that's not easy. So I hope that you will enforce the parking issues, the construction issues in what you recommend for St. Mary's. Any questions?
Thank you. No questions? Jennifer Scott, and then Roger Cummings.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Scott. I live at 30 Tate. Does that sound familiar to you? Architect. We're the only property surrounded on 3 sides. Glad you didn't ask me for this tonight because I'm going to frame it. This is the first time we've received a construction notice since we purchased this home in 1997. I don't think we were on the list. I received it after placing a call to Jennifer Savage. First one ever. I knew about this project 10 days ago when a neighbor, Sylvia, told me about it. I'm not happy about it, but I have a great relationship with my neighbor. I love St. Mary's mostly because of Terry and her kids and her school and what they bring to the community, but I really feel like we were left out. We're the only property drawn on your plans. Is there a reason? You can contact us. I am a construction lending expert.
Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, please address your comments to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
I feel like, because I've been in construction lending since 1986, and I'm an expert at it, that the architect should have contacted us. I think there should have been some kind of contact here. We are impacted by the school. We are impacted. I have an issue with the traffic. I agree with everybody else about the traffic. People don't wait 5 or 10 seconds in line. I have an issue because I don't understand how our view is being impacted. The entire back of our home has a panoramic view of the mountains. And I believe a 34-foot building is going to impact that. I'd like to know how that would be impacting it since this is so new to us. And if you guys don't know, and you may not, we don't mind the sound of the kids. We love the kids. We're in support of the school. We don't want a wall next to our chain link jasmine fence. Those kids come over our fence to get their balls when they kick them over the fence. Maybe they need a fence with a gate. We don't care. We want to support the kids. We want to support St. Mary's. We want to support our neighbor. But this is going to be hard on us. And the sound, the demo, the last project you guys did on Main, you guys had the construction trucks hauling debris down our street every 10 minutes, all night long. I had to go out there and block that traffic with my car to get them to go down North Santa Cruz so the neighbors could sleep. Friday and Saturday nights, I'm glad somebody brought up the bar noise. I have a baseball bat next to my door and a phone. I police that parking lot every night since 1997. I've had people break into my house. I had a $60,000 robbery. I had my car broken into last week. I want some security.
Thank you. The last card I have is Roger Cummings.
My name is Roger Cummings. I live also at 30 Tate Avenue in Los Gatos. And Jennifer Scott is my significant other, and as you can tell, she's very emotional about this particular project. I just want to reiterate again, we're behind St. Mary's expansion, and we understand the need of it for the community, but we just want to make sure that from a parking perspective, a construction perspective, and just a consideration perspective, given the unique location of our home being surrounded by St. Mary's, that the architect and staff and parish keep us in mind when there's any kind of changes or modifications to any plans that would impact our specific considerations, which are view, noise, parking, etc. We're very pleased that St. Mary's has this opportunity to do the expansion. And as Jennifer mentioned, our biggest concern regarding construction is that during the water main expansion or repairs, there was a considerable amount of disruption on Tate Avenue that impacted not only ourselves but most of the neighbors up and down Tate Avenue all the way to Highway 9. And we just want to make sure that, again, the applicant and the construction company work in conjunction with the neighbors to make sure that it's safe for us to be on the streets, as well as for the children and parents that frequent and use St. Mary's. Thank you.
Thank you. Last card I have is Jason Farwell.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Jason Farwell, 18841 Blythewood Drive in Los Gatos, actually unincorporated county. I too have a daughter at St. Mary's. I got 2 young boys that I plan to send to St. Mary's. I think St. Mary's, as everybody's pointed out here tonight, I echo their compliments and the benefits that St. Mary's provides to our community. I think it's a fantastic church, a fantastic school, and it continues to serve a very valid purpose in our community. As far as parking and traffic, as it's been pointed out, the assessment district is ending in December. I'm a commercial landowner here in downtown, and I fully support a new assessment district, provided there's a plan for new parking. Let's get it built. Let's do a lot in Lot 6. Let's improve it. We need it. So, it'll benefit the school, it'll benefit the downtown, it'll benefit the neighbors. I think it'll actually serve as a buffer too to the neighbors and maybe help with some of the noise issues. So I know this is a little tangential issue to the school, but let's get a new assessment district and get this thing going. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards, so I will go to the applicant. You will have 5 minutes to address any issues that have been raised.
Yes, at the Planning Commission hearing, the applicant absolutely agreed to work with neighbors in terms of the construction, traffic, and noise. This is something that I have personal experience with DevCon with on other sites. We are very proactive before large events, concrete pouring, demolition, things like that, to have neighborhood meetings so that people are involved. In fact, one of the conditions outlined and put into the staff report, we agreed at that meeting to have a regular neighborhood kind of kickoff meeting. We will have a telephone number that is usually the project superintendent, his cell phone, that is available 24/7 that people can call if there are parking or noise related issues, and we will go through outreach at those times. Very confident, and the contractor has agreed, with the applicant at that time. So I just wanted to make that point. Back to Ms. Scott. I was not responsible for public outreach. I believe that part is done by the town. I'm not sure. She said that she was left off the list. I can't answer that per se. We did go through, though, and we did build the required pole structure that was up in place for several weeks. I think that's very visible. I don't believe that the view, that I haven't stood at her lot and looked, but our building is to the east and almost northeast of her, so I don't believe that a view to the south and west will be impacted in any way. And then in comment to the wall was recommended through the mitigated neg deck process with that environmental consultant. It was an acoustical issue. Currently, there's a chain link fence. The school was fine with the chain link fence, but that was a recommendation that came through that process, and we accepted that as a condition. But if that is not required, I think we're open to discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Before you leave, I do have a question. With regard to Ms. Scott, understanding that you are not responsible for the noticing, the issues she raised about, being kept in the loop at this point, is there any problem with that?
No, not at all.
All right.
No.
Anything else? See none, thank you very much.
Okay.
We will now close the public portion of the hearing. And turn to the council for discussion motions. I have a question of staff, though. Mr. Stahl raised the issue of parking. Does staff have any input on that issue?
One moment, please. I believe he spoke regarding the parking assessment district. The parking space at the 59 Victory Lane did have credits in the parking assessment district, as well as one on-site parking space. Those would remain active as all the other parking assessment district spaces, both on-site and within the district, will remain for the rest of the downtown area.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
And the one additional question that Mr. Stahl raised was a rumor or a concern that the parking standards in downtown might be voided after the cessation of the existing parking assessment district. And unless Ms. Bailey says otherwise, I assume that is not the case. So the parking standards remain in effect even after the termination of the existing parking assessment district.
And then pose the same question to you as I did to the applicant with regard to the 30 Tate lack of notice. Is that something that you have an answer to or can address in the future?
The noticing list that went out for this evening's meeting was the same that went out for the Planning Commission meeting. We sincerely apologize for her not receiving notice, but she was included on the noticing list.
All right, thank you. Now, Ms. Jensen.
Follow up to the mayor's question regarding the parking district. I know it's tangentially related to St. Mary's, but given that they're in the current parking district and have credit for some parking spaces, last week we discussed parking in the downtown and the parking district, and I believe that there was some direction for an outreach, at least by the town or by business leaders, to do something about figuring out what they want to do with respect to a new parking district. Is there any update on that?
Mr. Larson.
Yes. The council directed, and the mayor and myself followed up and met with the Chamber of Commerce and expressed the council's interest in the business community taking the leadership role if there were to be any further pursuit of a recreation of a parking assessment district or some other assessment district in the downtown. Given the comments made by your final speaker tonight, we will revisit that issue with the Chamber of Commerce at our next meeting with them.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Question of staff. I am trying to find, and I cannot find, in the mitigation, the reference to the wall that was talked about. And is there any flexibility that at this point there could be some discussion between the property owner and St. Mary's that if they both are in agreement that they want a landscaped chain link as a preference to a solid wall, can they still do that, or is it locked in once we approve these 800 pages?
To clarify, the mitigation requires a fence, just a wood fence with no walls, so it certainly does not need to be, a wood fence with no holes, so it certainly does not need to be a wall. If a wood fence was not acceptable to the neighbor on 30 Tate, we could look at discussing that, but I do not have an answer on legally whether or not that would be possible. But staff will discuss that and get an answer to you.
It sounds as though they're discussing it and getting an answer to you right now.
Thank you for that moment, and I'll start the response and then let Ms. Savage respond additionally if she has anything to add. Generally, once an environmental study is done, the initial study was done in this case, and it addressed noise issues at the property line. And the mitigation monitoring plan does establish a condition that there be some sort of a solid fence as opposed to the existing chain link fence. While we are all sympathetic to the existing neighbor, again, like you said, we're looking at this going forward. And while this neighbor would like to or be open to something maybe less structured, if she can reach an agreement with the school, again, looking forward, if the property were sold and the next owner saw that that was a condition of the mitigation monitoring program, the school and the parish would be in violation of that and then have to remedy at that time. So generally, once that the environmental conditions have been established, if the council approves that and adopts the mitigated negative declaration tonight, along with the mitigation monitoring plan, then the property owner at 30 Tate and the school could work on some mutually agreeable solution, so long as it was some sort of a solid barrier that would deal with the existing noise issues.
Further questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My recollection from reading the noise issue section of the mitigation plan indicated that the noise would go from 0 to 1 decibel as a result of this project. And now we're constrained to somehow mitigate the potential 1 decibel increase. I hope that that does not hold up this process. I appreciate the fact that the neighbor feels comfortable with the way things are, even offers a gate in her fence so that the kids can come and retrieve their balls and go over the fence. But as far as I'm concerned, I hope that if we do come to closure tonight and approve this application, that issue will not hold up this project, because it is that mitigation was based on that potential 1 decibel increase in noise. Okay, if I might, Madam Mayor, just to comment on the Planning Commission's meeting. I thought it was a really good meeting. In my reading, I thought the Commission did an excellent job in reviewing all of the issues, dealing, I think, rationally and appropriately in some of the accommodations requested by the school. Also offered a real response, a real significant response to the concerns of the neighbors that seemed to me primarily focused on the construction issue, construction traffic, where you're going to park the vehicles of the construction crew, and what's the entrance and egress from the site. And I appreciate tonight now the architect giving us that schemata of the circulation for construction. I also noticed that the issue of the brick wall on Victory Lane was acceptable to the Planning Commission. That that to reduce not only the cost of the additional brick, but also the weight that the brick would bring to the building that would then impact the construction engineering itself, seemed to be very rational. I think the Planning Commission acknowledged that. There was that issue of the maximum number of students and some annual review of that. I personally, I do not feel it's necessary for us to do any extraordinary accommodation for the reporting of that annually, if that annual report is acceptable to the school. The report goes to staff. I'm not aware of any other project in our town that automatically goes back to the Planning Commission to do a calculation or a count of numbers that have been included in a CUP or a PD. So I would be inclined to, if the school has indicated an interest, that we would go through a process that would be less onerous than having to call the Planning Commission together once a year to look at the numbers of kids that St. Mary's has. I would not accept that, but I do think that it makes sense to go back to the staff. And if there seems to be an offset, then that can certainly come up through the process if necessary. I do think also we need to be cognizant of the fact that there are rules in relationship to Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act, which we all know as RLU-IPA from 2000, that protects religious experience within our frame of government. And I think we have to be careful of oversubscribing or over-conscripting the activities of the church. And one of those activities is included in the description as educational processing. So for our purposes, I think I would be more than willing and more than interested in moving this application along. And a reminder to all of us that with 4 people at the dais, a 2-2 split fails. That's how it works. So with that in mind, I would like to start the process, Madam Mayor. if it's agreeable to you.
In just a moment, the answer is a conditional yes. I'm going to go to staff. You have on your recommendations basically seven motions. Some of them are not motions. For example, number 1. I am going to assume that 1, you want us to go through in this order, and secondly, if it's not a motion, you would just ask that I read it into the record. Is that how you want us to proceed?
The items could be gone in the order, or it could be a motion to accept Planning Commission's recommendations following your direction to the clerk to read the title of the zone change ordinance, which is number 5 of the items.
So you don't want me to go in this order?
You can go item by item. That is always acceptable.
All right, then, before I direct the clerk to read, I will retract that and look to Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did have a question I wanted to follow up with staff before a motion's made regarding the mitigation monitoring plan and negative declaration. I just wanted to make sure I understood Ms. Prop's answer that the council would be legally permitted to, in effect, change a mitigation measure, and I guess we're not, because a solid fence made of anything, I assume cardboard, is okay. And I'm very concerned that we'll get into trouble with CEQA and our monitoring plan and our mitigation if we were to alter something that's been put into a mitigation monitoring plan.
We have proposed language, if that is in the council's interest, to include some additional language that we would include, or other alternative material approved by a noise consultant to reduce the potential noise impacts to meet the requirement in the mitigation monitoring plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then, before we get back to Mr. Brzezinski, I'm going to direct the clerk to read the title of the zone change ordinance.
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending the town code effecting a zone change from R-1D and C2 to R-1D PD for property at 219 Bean Avenue. APNs 510-44028, 510-44083, and 510-44084.
Thank you. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I am going to take this in order because I think that's easiest and probably the safest thing to do. Now we're going to accept the Planning Commission's findings and recommendations in the form of the meeting minutes that are attachment 11 and adopt the mitigated negative declaration, which actually, even though our document says attachment 1, it's exhibit 1 of attachment 1, I believe, and the mitigating monitoring plan, which is attachment 4, and there is a motion required, and the manager wants to make a comment.
With the, this would be where to insert the change or other alternative material approved by a noise consultant. That was just read by the town attorney.
And that would be
regarding
my,
the fence.
that would be the intent of my motion, correct? Okay. So that is the motion.
Do you need a second? Did you stop talking?
He
Was that a
stopped.
period? Okay.
Can't you tell when I stop talking?
Second.
Yeah, okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Jensen.
I had a question. I didn't hear the required findings, or were you going to go through the
Not there
rest of
yet.
them? Oh, so we are bifurcating the motions. Is that correct?
We are bifurcating. We're looking to the maker of the motion, and so
Okay.
right now we're
All
only
right.
doing what on our staff report is our items 1 and 2.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's my intention, is to work through each individual. If we get one, we'll go on to the next.
So at this point, we have a motion and a second discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Mr. Brzezinski, are you moving on?
I'm moving on. I think the next item then would be to make the required findings, and if you look at attachment 3, those findings are clearly delineated. I don't think I need to explicate them, and adopt the plan development ordinance, which is attachment 5, approving the Plan Development Application PD 11006 with the modifications as recommended by the Planning Commission. And I just want to make note that those modifications were contained as specified in the staff report, and I do believe the manager wants to make some comment to this.
Yes. The mayor has asked that staff keep a running list of changes the council have discussed, and this is where most of those changes would come in into item number 3 on your action. First, the noise monitoring or the noise alternative for the fencing would also go into the plan development under item number 37. So we're assuming that would be included in the
That is
maker's
included,
motion. Yes. Second, in the desk item, there was the revised junior high school elevation. It was page 3, item 4. We're assuming that would be included in the motion. The typos, again, on pages 3 and 4 of the desk item under conditions 76 and 94 would be included in the motion.
Yes, we're not doing a apostrophe S on.
Yes. The employees, there was a clarification. Staff wanted to suggest that for condition number 8, the maximum number of staff for the church and school combined is limited to 53 individuals.
That's correct.
Just to clarify, it's not FTEs.
Right.
And we came up with alternatives for the council's consideration on the reporting, be it annual reporting or a initial one-year report to the Planning Commission, and staff would be prepared to present those when the maker of the motion or the council wishes.
Okay. I would like to ask the council's interest at that point, because it's stated this is language the Planning Commission recommended. I can't believe I have stated my concerns about the process up, whether it's annual, biannual, whether it's for a period of time. I'm open to recommendations. I'll include those recommendations in the motion as we get feedback.
All right, then, right now, we're just going to stop at that point.
Correct.
The maker of the motion has accepted all of the clarifications from the town manager, but, Mr. Manager, I don't think we have any closure yet on the annual reporting. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. We have some alternatives to present, or the council can provide independent direction.
All right, so right now, the motion doesn't include anything with regard to annual reporting. So within that context, do we have a second for the motion?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Jensen.
The annual reporting is important to me. I'm not going to miss an opportunity to compliment the Planning Commission. They did a very good job on their meeting. I appreciate the minutes and their consideration to all the issues. Annual reporting is not unprecedented, certainly historically. Recently, it's more rare. However, the Planning Commission just did approve a private educational institution at Old Town, where the Planning Commission required that institution come back in a year and report on how it was doing with this CUP. I understand that this is not a CUP. However, I don't think it's burdensome to have a public hearing where the public gets to comment on how the construction went, how the school is complying with the conditions that are contained in the PD. I am not anticipating by saying this that I think the school is going to be in violation. However, my experience being on the Planning Commission and the short experience on the council is that it's very important for people to be heard on these issues, particularly with schools in a residential area. And I would be very interested, for one, in listening to what the alternatives are to get that accomplished before I could. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't support a motion that didn't contain it, but I would have a really hard time.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. So that kind of changed the way I thought the conversation was headed, because I was looking at the language that's on page 4 of our staff report that just suggests that at least annually the applicant submits a report on the number of students and staff to the town. And I was going to suggest that as an amendment to the motion. And just having it go to staff, I think it's not a big deal for the school and the church to do that count. And I think it's very helpful when you have an institution where you have people coming and going. This is what happened in the past, that, it's all of a sudden, in the year 2000, whenever it was, to realize, oh, we had a limit that we went past, and nobody was around when that was first set up, and so on. So I don't think it's a big deal. Now, what Councilmember Jensen was talking about was a whole different thing, because that's talking about performance on all of these other issues and going to the Planning Commission, and I'm not real enthusiastic about that. But let me just try throwing out as an amendment to the motion, adding that sentence that's on page 4 of the staff report, and see where that one goes.
Would you please read that aloud for me?
Yes, it's annual reporting. At least annually, the applicant shall submit a report providing the number of students and church and school staff to the town of Los Gatos.
Now, before I ask the maker of the motion if he accepts that, I have a question of staff. My issue on that proposal is if the applicant submits a report to the staff that demonstrates or that reflects having students or staff in excess of the PD-approved number, what would staff's thought be about what happens next? Mr. Larson.
Staff in a case like that would, without any direction to the contrary, would most likely notify the Planning Commission and Council and take enforcement staffs on their own with the property owner. One of the alternatives we were presenting was to deal with that specific issue, and it would be to add a second line to what was just read by Councilmember McNutt, which would be any nonconformance to the established standards in this plan development shall be presented to the Planning Commission for direction. So that was one of the alternatives we were going to raise. So it'd be an annual report, and if there's non-compliance, we'd bring it to the Planning Commission.
Ms. McNutt, would that be something that would be acceptable to you?
May I hear that sentence again? I think there was something in there I didn't like, but let me hear it again.
Any nonconformance to these established standards in this plan development shall be presented to the Planning Commission for direction.
Okay, so the way that's worded is it doesn't reference specifically just the number of students and staff. It says standards, which opens it up to the 109 standards that are listed there. So how is staff going to find the time to schedule a review of all of those standards? So can that be narrowed down to something more specific?
Any nonconformance to these student and staff standards as specified in the plan development shall be presented to the Planning Commission for direction.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
Yes.
All right, then I'm going to go to the maker of the motion. Can you accept that?
I can. I do want to clarify. I really want to make sure we know what we're doing. Okay? This does not in any way, shape, or form eliminate public input or the response of our community. I think what it does, it says that we want to work cooperatively with the school so that we can continually monitor over the course of, apparently it's the rest of the history of the school, because there's no stop date on this, that they are in compliance with the issues of numbers of personnel and students on campus. I assume we're concerned about that because of impacts. Why would we be concerned about it for any other reason? And I think, therefore, that the language that is offered by the staff is appropriate, and I think the opportunity for a response by the Planning Commission and Council is forthcoming in the recommendation. But I want to be really careful about kind of starting to appear like we're so draconian that we've got someone we're going to have to stay on top of because we know what they do. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not the case here. This is our town, and we operate on the basis of the fact that we can trust each other in great measure. So with that language as the proposal, I think I'm comfortable, I think I'm satisfied, and I don't think that we need to expand it beyond what it is. And I did not hear any objection raised by the school community as to that occurring. So that would be my take on that.
So we have the motion with the acceptance of the proposed input. The seconder has already accepted that language. Discussion, and I will jump in on discussion. First of all, it's going to sound like a broken record. I thought that the Planning Commission did, and especially, I shouldn't say especially, did a great job on this. The issues that they raised were issues that were of concern to me. The way they resolved them, I thought were good resolutions. The one question I had was compliance, because they said that make an annual report, and I thought, well, what happens if it's out of kilter? And so this modification to the motion addresses that for me. Further discussion? All right, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
All right, then I think we move to waive the reading of the zone change ordinance. And there's a required motion on that as well?
Yes, that is, so you have made a motion to waive the reading of the zone change ordinance. We do need a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. The title has already been read.
So then I will move to introduce the ordinance to effectuate the zone change. That's my motion.
Do we have a second? I will second it.
There's an "and" after the end of 6. I wondered if those two are supposed to be 6 and 7 joined together.
I think we can make them separately. I think it's okay because there's another motion required at the end of 7.
All right, so then we have a motion to introduce the ordinance to effectuate the zone change. Seconded. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
And finally, I believe, I'll make the required findings that, again, is contained in attachment 3, and approve architecture and site. The application is S12098 with the modifications as recommended by the Planning Commission and with the recommended conditions of approval that are noted in attachment 8.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank the public, applicant, and staff and council for your work. We're going to take a 5-minute break. back to order. Other business, agenda item 2, verbal presentation on the attorney-client relationship and communication. And as just a bit of a backstory on that, in November when I became mayor, one of the things that I wanted to bring forward was an analysis or discussion of the relationship between the council and the attorney-client relationship, and also communications, verbal communications to and from the attorney, written communications to and from. That was in November. What's happened since then is that we've had such intense hearings with so many communications, both verbal and in writing, to the staff, to the council, that these issues I had have even become more expanded. So with that in mind, the town attorney has agreed to and will be clarifying some of these issues for us. I will ask you, Ms. Propp, do you want to go through your whole presentation? I haven't even looked at it. Or do you want to take it step by step and we ask questions? How would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Mayor and council members. As the mayor mentioned, she asked that this matter be scheduled as an agenda item, and it is a basic overview of both the attorney-client relationship and addressing some of the communication issues and privileges. I think the easier way would be there's just a few slides to go through the presentation, and then if there are still questions, I'm available to answer those.
Thank you. Go ahead.
To begin with, the question is, when you have a public entity, who's the client? And if you look at the California rules of professional conduct that govern the standards for lawyers in the state of California, the rules that establish that a public entity as the organization is the client. So it's not the individual members of the council. It is the organization, the town itself, who acts through its highest authorized officer, employee, or body. In the case of the town of Los Gatos, our highest authorized body is the town council. So it's the town council acting as a council majority who is the client, and that's ultimately who the obligation is for the attorney-client relationship. Just to back up and give you a little bit of background is the evidence code, the California Evidence Code, section 950 and 952, talk about attorney-client privilege and talk about that there is confidential communication between the client and the lawyer. That includes legal opinions and advice. And it's the client who holds the privilege. So you go back to the original question tonight, who's the client? And again, it's the council acting as a majority is who holds the privilege. So every individual council member, when they receive confidential information or communication from the attorney, whether it's the town attorney or an outside attorney engaged by the town council for special services, it's the council as a whole, as a majority, who holds the privilege. Individual council members must uphold those privileges and abide by that. Therefore, only a council majority can authorize release of any confidential or privileged information. It's not an individual's council members to give up to say, oh, I talked to the attorney and the attorney advised. It really would be a council majority. And that rarely happens for most jurisdictions, although on some occasion there may be a reason that the council as a whole decides that they want to release that attorney-client privileged information. So getting into the key issues that the mayor asked to address is the communication issues. And communication between the client and the attorney for a public entity are generally governed by both the Brown Act and the California Public Records Act. Most of this will be a review for most of you since you've gone through recent training, ethics training, and you know that state law requires open and transparency in government, that the people's business should be done in the public, and that's the basic tenets of the Brown Act. For the California Public Records Act, that also supports the concept of open and transparency in government, by allowing members of the public to make requests for documents that are kept and maintained in the ordinary course of business by the town. So I'll go into each of these separately to try and address some of the specific issues as it relates to communication between the attorney and the client, being the majority of the council. With respect to the Brown Act, as indicated, meetings have to occur in the public. Deliberations and decisions are to occur in the public at open meetings. And there is a limited exception for closed sessions that council is allowed to meet outside of the public for litigation, real estate and labor negotiations, and personnel matters. With respect to materials that are available, we'll take it in two sections. Communication prior to a meeting. Generally, any of the communication that's relevant to an item that council's considering on an agenda should be made available to the council as well as the public. That's the form of the staff reports, the form of communication that is received by the town, and anything that the town receives, we make available to the council and the public. On some occasions, there are legal issues that may arise as the council considers a certain item on the agenda. The role of the attorney is to provide legal information to the council so they can make an informed decision. And that information is generally provided under the attorney-client privilege, and again, is considered confidential information so that the council understands any of the potential risks in either making or not making a particular decision. From time to time, the council has asked some of those questions in an open meeting, and again, where applicable and the whole council wants that opinion provided at a meeting, that can be done in open session. However, from time to time, that information communicated by an attorney representing the town council prior to the meeting is considered privileged and protected unless the majority of the council agrees to release that information. With respect to Public Records Act, you always get into a discussion about what's a record. And it's a very broad description under California law, but they generally pertain to any writing. It's not just documents, it can be electronic materials that are kept in the ordinary course of business. There's plenty of documents or records that the town creates but are not maintained in the ordinary course of business, things like drafts and other communication which may be transitory. That is not necessarily a public record if it isn't deemed on the town's schedule for what types of records are required to be maintained. And as you can see, a record can be a writing, an electronic document, it can be a photograph, it can be a DVD of your council meeting, and again, those are made available upon request to members of the public if they request that. And generally, the longstanding theory about what is a public record is keyed into the terms kept in the ordinary course of business. So for years and years, the town, as well as most public agencies, have taken the position that it's the records created, submitted, and under the control and discretion of the town. And with respect to emails, when the Public Records Act was drafted by the state legislature, as well as the Brown Act, they never really took into consideration electronic communication as we know it today, whether it's emails or tweets or Facebook posts or other types of common electronic communication, text from a PDA. And courts are now struggling in trying to interpret what that really means. And for years, the general rule has been is that documents that may be concerning town business that are communicated directly to a council member on their own personal device, like a computer or a smartphone or some other type of communication, was not kept or maintained by the town in the ordinary course of business. In 2008 and 2009, the city of Tracy litigated that with respect to council emails that were delivered to council's home email devices that were not paid for or provided by the city of Tracy at that time. And again, it was based on some procedural issues in that case, but the court determined that those were not public records that were subject to disclosure. Most recently, in mid-March, a local judge of the Santa Clara Superior Court, in a case brought against the city of San Jose, most recently has actually made a different ruling determining that the emails and texts and tweets and any communication sent to a council member on a private device, making no distinction of whether that's provided or paid for by the city, can and in fact may be requested as a public record, and then the public agency, it would be incumbent on them to go to the elected official and ask for their records that pertain to town, or in that case, city business. That case is currently being appealed by the city of San Jose, and likely we expect to see a lot of cities and counties filing Friends of the Court, the amicus brief for that proposition. So while it's not binding the local decision, it's certainly an indication of how the courts are starting to interpret electronic communication and the concept of open and transparent government. I can't project as to what's going to happen, but it's just sort of a shadowing of things to come and things on the horizon that we'll be keeping you apprised of. So that is the gist of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions that the council may have.
Questions? Ms. Jensen.
I have a question on your, I don't know what page it is, it's called Who is the Client? And you told us that the client is the council acting as a council majority. So my question is, given that on many of the questions that we may have as individual council members, you probably don't know what the council majority thinks. So how is it that you determine who the client is when you're answering inquiries? Who does that question get shared with? How does it get shared with the public, if it does, or other council members? And as an individual council member, what's my privilege? And if I share information that's my personal work product with you, then what happens to that information? How do I protect that?
So in general, as previously indicated, it's the public entity, the town, as almost as if a corporation, who is the client, and they act through the council majority. But the role of the attorney who represents the town or the public entity, while the client is the entity, from on a day-to-day basis gets questions from not only council members, but committee and commission members and staff, employees, and the like. And again, it is the attorney's role to provide advice and legal opinions on those matters that could ultimately impact the town and the town's risk analysis on several matters. So in general, whether it's a council member or a staff member, an employee or a committee or commission that's asking, and you're right, unless the council's taken an action, neither the attorney nor the staff has necessarily any idea how a council majority is going to make a decision. If it's basically within the parameters of the law and there's no, it's in the best interest of the public entity, then the attorney provides that advice, and generally the employee or the committee or commission or a council moves through their process, whether it's negotiating a contract for a staff member or a committee or commission making recommendations to the council, or the council deciding a matter at a public meeting. The real issue is not when you're within the bounds of the law, but who the client is, and what happens is when a council or a staff member or a committee or commission member or a body decides not to follow the law. And that's when the attorney has the obligation to notify the council as a whole, all 5 members, that the public entity is at risk. So in general, on day-to-day questions, as I mentioned, any attorney representing the town, whether it's for litigation counsel or in-house counsel or especially assigned counsel for matters such as the redevelopment agency, the former agency, are making recommendations, providing advice, and that would be available to the council, but on a day-to-day basis, that's not necessarily, I mean, everything that all of the attorneys who represent the town don't send a list to the council at the end of every day saying, I gave the following advice on the following matters. However, at any time that there's any question that should be before the council because there's not an agreement between the advice that's given and the advice that is, or the actions being taken, then that's the type of matter that gets communicated to the council for your consideration and your decisions. Each of you may ask questions from time to time, and generally prior to the meetings, we try and provide that information to all of the council so you have all of the same information going into a council meeting. From time to time, a number of you have questions about conflicts of interest and have consulted in-house counsel. As many of you have disclosed on the dais, that is a decision under the Political Reform Act and the Fair Political Practice Commission guidelines that you make, and it's ultimately your decision. And when you consult with the attorney, that is not privileged, confidential attorney-client communication. That is information that you've consulted, and then it's yours to disclose to the public that you have made a decision either that you're legally obligated to recuse yourself or that you will be participating in a matter. And from time to time, some of you disclose that you've consulted with the attorney or we've consulted with the FPPC on those issues.
I'm going to step in now because there was so much information that I didn't even know what I heard. But so let me try this. I'm going to take it from the perspective of myself. I have a client, and the only person that I can discuss matters with is my client, and if he or she tells me something, I can't tell it to anyone else. That's if I have an individual client. So my question is, given your definition of client from your perspective, which is a majority of the council, if a council person discusses something with you, do you have the obligation then to share that information with all of us? Are you prohibited from sharing it with all of us? As a practical matter, what do you do with communications you have with individual council members?
Generally, if it's an item that's coming before council and a council member has a question, then that is clearly, and for the consideration of an agenda item, that's clearly communicated to the council as a whole so that you all have that information prior to a meeting. From time to time, a council member may ask a process question. And it's not really a legal opinion. It's more of where do I find in the code, or practical is a mitigated negative declaration part of the initial study? Is it a separate document? Those don't really call for the same kind of legal opinions or conclusions or advice, more of a procedural question. that the mayor or a council member may have that assist them in moving through the documents. If it's relevant and there is benefit to all of the council, or it's not a legal matter, a lot of times you'll see those responses in a desk item or a memo from the manager that is equally available to the public. I think one of your questions was keeping in mind who's the client. If one of you, since none of you individually are the client, if one of you were to make a disclosure that rises to the level of that it puts the town at risk, or it is a judgment that the entire council majority should make, clearly that's under the rules of ethics, has to be communicated to the entire council. For example, on a day-to-day basis, the town and all of its attorneys, whether it's in-house or special counsel, represent employees and the public entity as part of litigation. Not every decision about the litigation is communicated on a day-to-day basis, but certainly there's an attorney-client privilege when an outside attorney representing the town is meeting with the employee who's involved in a situation, whether we're interviewing a public works staff member or a police officer on a traffic accident. Where that comes to the council's attention is if for any reason an attorney for the town learns something that, again, rises to either not following the law or placing the town and the public entity at some risk, that information is always communicated to the town council.
All right, well, I don't see anyone raising their hand, so I'll keep going with it. It has been our process, and in fact, I think it's in our rules, that staff and the attorney encourage or request that council members provide staff with, before a council meeting, with questions, with information we have, with documents we have. And once that information in whatever form is given to the attorney, let's just stick with the attorney, then what does the attorney do? Does the attorney then share that with everybody, or what?
And again, it goes back to the attorney-client privilege. Attorney-client privilege under the state law covers legal opinions and advice given by the lawyer to the client in confidence. So a number of things that get transmitted, whether it gets transmitted to the town attorney or the town manager or another staff member, may not be subject to the attorney-client privilege. So if, going back to emails or communication that a member of the council may receive from a member of the public, if you look at how the law seems to be emerging, then if that San Jose case decision were to stand by the appellate court, it would stand for the proposition that any time a council member receives any communication from a member of the public, then if that logic holds, it would be considered a public record and subject to disclosure to the public, not just to the other council members. I'm not sure I've seen it happen, but if a council member were to receive, I can't imagine a document that you would receive that is necessarily subject to the attorney-client privilege, but you may have a question about a document or a communication, and that would be handled just as we discussed other confidential communication that would be shared with all of the council members.
At this point, though, I'm not talking about third parties because I will roll into that, but I'm talking about the staff or the attorney wants the council members, if you have questions, please give me your questions before the council meeting. Or if you have some documents you think we should see, give us those documents before the council meeting. These communications that are being requested, no matter what form they're in, then when they get to you, do you then share them with the council as a whole so that we are all have the same information?
So it's the council members under the communication and under the Brown Act that have the obligation to make disclosures for anything that they've considered, whether it's a document or communication that they've received that influence their decision that they may make on a matter on the dais regarding an agenda item. So it's incumbent on a council member that if they receive information, not necessarily from staff, that the staff doesn't have access to, we have encouraged the council, whether you make the disclosure on the dais or provide that information to town staff ahead of time, that we can then make it available to the public, since under the Brown Act, the public has the right to know what a council member has received that is part of their consideration or influence in their decision, or might be part of the decision and the process that they make on the dais in a public meeting. The public has the ability to hear what you hear for all of the council meetings. The public has the right and the ability to see all the documents you see in the packet. But if you receive a document, if a council member receives a document not distributed to staff, and it somehow factors into your decision making, then we've encouraged the council to provide that to staff so that it can be distributed to the public and the other council members.
Ms. Jensen?
I'm not sure I heard the answer to the mayor's question. And I have the same question. I don't think that she was referring to, and I'm certainly not referring to, something that I receive. I am required, or certainly strongly encouraged under the Town Council Code of Conduct, to ask questions of the staff or to inform them of research or writing or documents that I've independently done, which may not be covered under which 99% of the time aren't covered under any kind of attorney-client privilege, nor are they a required disclosure the way you've just described it. So I think the question is, so I could see, under what you've just said, council members would just come and say what they have to say at the meeting. So if we're being required to give staff these questions, et cetera, prior to the meeting, they're not covered by attorney-client disclosure required. They're not covered by an attorney-client privilege. We haven't received some document that's influencing it. We've actually gone out and, for example, looked at a project site, or we've done whatever. So then what's the basis for the providing of that to staff, aside from preparation? I'm just talking about the legal attorney-client basis, if it's not covered by a privilege, to give it to staff prior to the meeting, when you're going to talk about it at the meeting in any event. And then what's the distribution that staff does of that with that document or information that you get from the council member prior to the meeting? That's what I understood the mayor to be asking you.
Sure. Let me start, and then I think I'm going to ask the town manager, because like you pointed out, it really goes well beyond the attorney-client and legal privilege or process. So generally, the council code of conduct encourages town council members to ask questions of staff prior to public meeting, and it's primarily for staff preparation, and so that staff has the response for not only the council but the information for the public. Generally, council members send that information in to the town manager, and I'll let Mr. Larson describe his distribution process. Now, specifically, if there is a legal question that has been sent in, then generally I'll prepare a response and provide it to all of the council members ahead of time. If indeed that council has done their own research or has additional information, certainly can present that at the meeting. But again, going back to the council code of conduct adopted by the council and ratified every year by each of the council members, The idea is to be able to provide as much information ahead of time so that staff can incorporate those matters into desk items. And you saw tonight that the desk item that Ms. Savage presented was a combination of council questions, questions from community members, and that was provided to both the council and the community.
Okay, Madam Mayor, before Mr. Larson talks.
Ms. Jensen, this is a follow-up on
Okay.
your question.
Kind of.
Well, let me have Mr. Larson, if you want to just respond, and then I'm going to go back to Ms. Jensen.
There's two sections of the council code of conduct policy that I think are relevant here. One is the one that the town attorney mentioned, which is council members being encouraged to submit questions for the efficient operation of the meeting to staff in advance, and that's kind of the clause. There's a second clause that drives how I respond to that, which is all council members are to have the same information available for making decisions. So if we get a request like happened tonight for the code sections referenced in the desk item, because all we provided were the code numbers, not the actual language, we made that, one council member requested that. We provided that information to all the council because it might have been information you needed for your deliberations tonight, and it's not, and your code of conduct policy directs us to the best of our ability to provide the same information to all council members.
Thank you. And Ms. Jensen, Ms. McNutt had her hand up.
I was going to retract my comment or question anyway.
Good. Ms. McNutt.
Well, I was going to try to summarize in a few words what I thought I heard to see if we're on the same. I think we might be a little bit clearer, but what I think I just heard is that, and I'll do it in two parts, and you can just nod your head yes or no. So questions from council to the attorney or to staff should be provided in advance so that staff has time to gather the information so we can have a productive meeting.
Yes.
And all of that information then is given to all of the council members so we all have the same playing field. And that's really not a matter of privilege, because why would we want to keep that secret or confidential? You don't have to shake your head on that one. And then in terms of material, if we do our own research or through our past experience, I know I've had that happen on a couple of occasions in the last 12 years where in projects I've worked on in other cities, there's been a document that's been helpful or something. And we are encouraged, I believe, in council policy to provide that to staff or the attorney so that it can be sent back out to everyone, again, so that we're all on the same playing field, because it's not a matter of privilege, but it's a matter of we all need to have the same information and fully disclose to the public all of the input that we got so that they know our thinking pattern so we come back out with a decision. Yes or no? Yes?
I would agree.
Okay.
Ms. McNutt?
Yeah.
All right. And this is actually an example from something that's happened recently. When we get communications from the attorney, and they are labeled attorney-client communications, there have been instances in my memory where they had facts on them, facts related to whatever it is we were discussing. It wasn't like law. And it has been a challenge to, I'll talk about myself. It has been a challenge to decide whether or not these were facts I could disclose to the public or not. So the question would be, when an attorney-client designated document comes to us, it would seem to me that it should have legal information and that we should not share that with the public because it isn't facts. Is that correct? And if not, where is it wrong?
That would be correct. However, in order to get to a legal opinion or advice, some of those memos contain factual background or examples that, again, would be part of that confidential information. But there are some documents that the council does receive, as you indicated, that are not marked privileged, and some of the questions that come to the attorney are not deemed to be part of the attorney-client privilege, and they are more factual based, and you have seen, those of you who have asked those kinds of questions have seen those answers show up in desk items or part of the public staff report and materials made available to the public.
Ms. McNutt.
Could we use, that's a really good point, because it feels like most of the time every email that comes from the attorney is marked attorney-client privilege, but we got one of those tonight, I believe, and which was somewhat referenced during the course of the discussion. So I don't remember anything in that particular memo that was sensitive or confidential. So is that one that really required that kind of marking, or is that just opening up a whole nother discussion we don't want to go there, as an example?
Again, going back to what an attorney-client communication is, it's talking about the providing legal opinions or advice, and again, without violating that attorney-client privilege, because just like it's not yours individually to share, it's not mine to share either. That would be a council decision. But any email or memo that includes the formulation of the attorney's theory, thought process that is conveyed to the council members as a whole, that talks about a certain area of law and certain processes that the council might want to consider in forming or making their decisions or their findings for a matter, again, would be considered attorney-client privilege, and the council as a whole would have to make a decision to share that information and make it public. For example, one of the things that has been decided to be public, because the council had asked for it, was an analysis of SB 50, which is the state legislation regarding whether a local public agency can consider school impacts when considering land use decisions. And again, the state legislature has tied the hands of the local agencies and prohibited local agencies from considering things like enrollment, traffic, and school impacts when they're considering land use decisions. Because the council a year or so ago had so many questions regarding that, staff provided you through the planning department and the then community development department, Ms. Rooney, issued a white paper. So yes, in conjunction with staff from time to time, or sections in your staff report might actually be drafted by the attorney's office or an outside counsel. But that information is made public based at the request of the council. But as far as the thoughts, the process, the advice to the council that a particular course of conduct may be risky, or that you have the following options, that would be considered attorney-client privileged communication.
That answer your question? All right. Mr. Brzezinski.
I think this is a follow-up to the last two comments from the mayor and from Councilwoman McNutt. So I'm looking at this memorandum from the Office of a Town Attorney, and it says confidential attorney-client communication and work product. And I guess it comes to the question I think I was hearing is that it almost seems like everything that comes out of the attorney's office is marked confidential. And I, for one, probably, when I read that and I assimilate it, I don't necessarily, I can't be trusted to sit at the dais and when an issue comes up, somehow I have isolated that, some of that information. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about some issues that are very personal to a client or to an individual, I think it's obvious we don't reveal that kind of thing. But I'm wondering if there should be more discrimination between those things that need to be labeled confidential. And I'm saying this is not rhetorical. I really don't know. But something that we need to see as confidential, and then just good advisement from the attorney that comes to us in whatever format. And without having a specific example to give you, I raise that as a concern, that everything from the attorney, if it's all confidential, it's kind of like if everyone wins and nobody wins kind of thing. If everybody gets a prize, then no one really gets a prize. And in this particular case, I think we may need to be more judicious in what we call confidential. That's the first comment, if I might just continue. I see the whole idea of our offering or requesting that the attorney or the manager research some piece of information that's going to be valuable to me as a person who's going to be part of the decision-making process. I think it's essential that that be communicated to everybody for the policy reasons that you've already mentioned. I think it really does benefit us. I think it's just a question of good governance. That's how you do good governance. Poor governance is done in, where people cook answers and then, you get decisions that aren't necessarily communicated publicly. That's where the Brown Act comes in great value, because this is open government. So I see that as really valuable. I don't see the benefit to not communicating those things. I certainly see, like our examples tonight, all those changes that took place in the staff report by recommendation of the Planning Commission, or the staff coming in and interpreting the Planning Commission, all valuable to get to the close. And, so I think that that's something that really works. I'm really curious, though, because one of the issues that you raised was anything that influences a decision as part of our open governance, anything that comes to us to influence that decision, we need to reveal that. So when we go and visit an applicant at a property, we reveal that. If we have potential for conflict because of an association with what's in front of us, we need to reveal that. How far does that extend to advisement given or information forwarded to us from a particular entity? Let's say someone who's in opposition to an application, and they've organized, and now they're coming to us and saying, here's the information I want you to have. Where does that not fall into the category of influencing my decision and then my having to reveal that?
And before you answer, I'm going to fold in my question so you can just sort of do it all at one time, hopefully. And this has come up as recently as today. And I think a lot of it has to do with emails. I get an email from whomever, and sometimes I can tell staff has it. Other times I assume staff has it, but I don't really know. So I want to fold that question into Joe's, into Mr. Brzezinski's.
I'm going to start it and let the town manager tag on, because a lot of the emails that you folks get go into different staff members have it. And again, staff strives to make as much as that information public. And sometimes you may get a question or an email from a member of the public, and we don't know where it came from, but you asked that question. So again, those are the items that you see folded into verbal staff reports, desk items, supplemental reports, addendums, things like that. Might not identify where the question came from, but that we've gotten the question and that we share that information with council publicly and with the council and all members of the public. I think that we strive to make as much of that information as open and available. Getting back to Councilmember Brzezinski's concern about what's privileged and not, if, again, it's just an information item like SB 50, where it can be made available to the members of the council, members of the Planning Commission, and the public, we try and do that. From time to time in some of the staff reports on different items, you'll see folded into the staff report information regarding the background of the law that pertains to it. Where we have where the attorney-client communication comes in is sometimes shortly before a meeting, someone from the council says, can I do this? Is this lawful? Is this legal? And so you might get a memo that gives you the background of the law, but then you're also going to get the opinion from the attorney as to what your options are, what you do with it. And again, the attorney-client privilege in the communication comes with sentences that shouldn't say, the attorney told me, or I received a memo and it said. That would be a clear violation of the attorney-client privilege that is held by the entire council. However, the information is provided to you so that you can formulate and use that information to make your findings, to make your decision. And it's not that you can't incorporate it, it's where you violate that privilege is where you say, the attorney told me if we take this course of conduct, we'll be violating the law and we might get sued for an inverse condemnation or taking of property or a civil rights violation or discrimination. That's a clear violation of providing and breaching the attorney-client communication. So I think that's the extreme, and the opposite is that you look at the information, that you take that information, and you incorporate it into your own opinions and findings.
Mr. Brzezinski, does that answer your question?
I do have a kind of an example, if I might. So if
I'm going to just ask that all of the council members proceed cautiously, that we're not talking about any specific example that may have come before the council or maybe coming before
I had a
the
really good
council
specific example.
in the future. That's what makes, we're doing this as an open, we're trying to make this as open and transparent.
I'm being facetious, okay? The point I want to make is, so it's, if I say, I think this could get us in trouble, and I haven't used the phrase, the attorney told me this could get us in trouble, then it's okay?
Again, your obligation as an elected official is to the entity just like the staff's is. We have to uphold what is in the public agencies, the public entity, in this case the town of Los Gatos' best interest. If you have elected or appointed officials or staff members going around saying, wow, I think this is going to get us into trouble, you're putting your own public entity at risk, and you may be, it's not the attorney-client privilege that you might be violating, but you might be violating your ethical obligation to your office.
Ms. Jensen.
Let me try a hypothetical. Town council receives a communication from our lawyer, which is labeled attorney-client privileged, and it says X, Y, and Z, this location, the facts regarding this location are blah, 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 and it goes on for maybe 4 paragraphs. And then it says, and here's refer to the town code section, blah. Now the council person incorporates that, doesn't say I got a memo from the attorney, doesn't say anything else, says the facts of this location are blah, 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 and therefore my motion is blah. Has that individual council member, now, number one, violated the attorney-client privilege by that? And number two, if the council person does that, does now there need to be a motion by the rest of the council to determine if there's a majority that says it's okay, you violated that because it's the council majority that's the client? Or by the one person waiving the privilege, albeit inadvertently, is it waived?
It's not waived unless the majority takes an action to waive it. There may be a violation by an individual, but there's not a waiver by the entire council. Hard to tell without a specific facts, and again, that's what's challenging about this discussion. But theoretically, if you are provided a code section, a town code section, a state law provision, and you go by the attorney, by a staff member, and you read it and you formulate your own opinions, impressions, and weave that into the facts and come up with your own findings, that's not a violation of the attorney-client privilege. It's just the attorney providing you background information and guidance and legal advice or direction that allows you then to formulate your own opinions and use that as part of your findings or motion or judgment on a particular matter.
All right, this, I'm going to follow up because I didn't get an answer to my part of this. I think I'm going to direct this to Mr. Larson. Am I expected when I get emails on an issue to forward all of those emails to staff, one, and two, will staff then distribute them to all of the council people?
That's an issue the staff has been thinking about because we've had a couple instances in the last two meetings, all three, today's and the prior two, where that issue has come up. You may recall Ms. Quintana submitted a pretty substantive piece to the council. She thought it had been submitted to staff, but she acknowledged afterwards, the next day when she checked her sent items folder, it had not been sent to staff. So it was never made part of the public record until there was a discussion that night. If the council had taken a finding or a recommendation from her email and incorporated it in your action, that document would never have been made part of the public record in any way unless you had made it so that night and referenced it, which is what we really ended up doing. What is occurring more and more, and as we saw at last week's meeting, we sent out a desk item with all the communications we had received, and one member of council at 5 o'clock said, I've just compared your desk item to all the emails I've gotten, and you've missed 10 of them. Why did you not include them? Staff had never received them, and so they had been sent to you individually. All 5 members of council had received it, but it hadn't been incorporated in the desk item because staff had no idea they even existed until the council member forwarded them to us. Having all 5 of you send us every email you ever received would overwhelm kind of our small town systems. And so I've been trying to think of an alternative approach that might work. And I've mentioned one idea last week, and it might be to designate a member of the council when they see all 5 members of council listed on an item, but not staff or the attorney or the clerk or anybody else, then that one member takes the obligation to forward the email on to staff so it can be made part of the public record. And I haven't forewarned him, but I thought it might be an appropriate role every year for the vice mayor. And I'll just use Mr. Vice Mayor Leonardis last week, received 3 emails from the public that he wasn't sure if staff or any other member of council had received, and he forwarded it to us. And those were included in your desk item that you received that night. So we fulfilled our obligation to get that information to you. Now, what if the designated individual of council, be it the vice mayor or someone else, is not one of the 3 recipients? Then I think we'd rely on the recipient council members to form on. The one other discussion I had last week, and I'd probably hand this back to the attorney, is I think this is my impression, and I think the attorney has to advise. If you receive an email and you feel it is substantive to your decision-making and judgment, it's my belief you have an obligation to make that part of the public record. If it is the 50-second letter you've received that says the sky is blue today, and it's a judgment call you're making that it's not contributing to your judgment, I'm not as sure you have an obligation to forward that on. And it becomes judgment calls on your part as what to do it. For staff to make sure we're being as transparent as possible, having some way to systematize what is a rapidly growing number of emails that are coming in to influence your decision-making would be helpful to make sure we're making it part of the public record. And, you know, choosing one member, I'll just use the hypothetical of the vice mayor. The vice mayor each year, since it rotates, it's the penance for being vice mayor. You'd have the obligation of forwarding on public emails that you or other members of council receive that staff isn't obviously copied on. Then it's only the outlying emails that the rest of you would have to deal with. You know, if Marcia and Diane get an email and the vice mayor's not copied on it, we can handle if we got copies of both those from you. It's getting 5 copies of 50 emails, trying to sort them through and get them out in a timely fashion is what's a workload challenge.
Let me
Is that
follow up
helpful?
let me follow up on that. So what I hear you saying, but I'm not so sure about it as a principled matter, or maybe it's whatever. If I get an email that's sent to me and 2 other people, and me or 3 other people, I can see doing what you're suggesting. But the challenge for me comes with one person sends me an email, and then do I just send it on to the town, and the town distributes it to the council and everybody else? Or does that person who sent it to me have the right to know I am going to send it on? And quite frankly, if that's the step I have to take, it probably won't get done because of the added burden. So what's your take on that?
I believe if it's sent to your town address, it is a public record no matter what, and the individual has no right of confidence on that. So for me, that's an easy question. It's the litigation the town attorney referenced that San Jose is appealing. That is the question on your private emails. And I believe the standard I would recommend to an elected official is if the email is part of your decision-making process, then you have an obligation for transparency and to provide that to the public.
Thank you. Other questions? Ms. McNutt, and then Mr. Leonardis.
Not a question, Mayor, but I know we have a council policy committee meeting being threatened for May, I believe. And I'm wondering if we should add to that increasingly long list of things to talk about, coming up with some language that addresses this idea about use of personal email. I know I'm going to be myself, because I kind of go back and forth on which ones I use, but I'm going to try to be really careful and diligent going forward to only use the town email for any conversations regarding anything on the town, because I personally don't want whoever being able to go through my personal business email looking around for whatever they're looking for. So I just wonder if we shouldn't have some guidance language added into council policy on that.
We will discuss that when we set up our policy meeting. But I think there's another issue here besides the individual council members keeping their town business on a town site. There's the issue of does the community needs to realize that they send something to Mr. Brzezinski on his personal email account, and it has to do with an agenda item. Even though one person was communicating with him, one person, that what I hear is that if it's something that is going to affect his decision, he should be forwarding that to staff, and staff should be distributing it. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. The question that keeps coming back to me is if we provide all of our questions to staff and staff provides answers prior to the meeting, and then those same answers are provided to all the other council members, how is that not a serial communication in violation of the Brown Act?
What the Brown Act governs is that a majority of the council can't communicate among each other outside of a public meeting. So what the Brown Act prohibits is Councilmember McNutt emailing Councilmember Leonardis with an opinion, who then forwards it to Councilmember Przinski. And you've basically convened a meeting by quorum of the council outside of a public meeting. By sending your questions to staff and having staff be, again, the distribution center for questions, not, and again, as you see in a desk item, it doesn't say Mayor Spector asked these questions, Councilmember McNutt asked these questions, Councilmember Jensen asked these, or provided this information to us. Again, it's staff's goal to distribute it to all council members and the public, and again, it's making it available to the public and making it available during a public meeting. That is exactly what the intent of the Brown Act is to make it open and transparent, and to let the public know what information council's considered in forming their decision. And again, I think in all the questions tonight, if there's any question or judgment, the question for the council member is, since the obligation under the both the Brown Act and the ethics rules under state law are for council members to make these disclosures, do the public's business in an open and transparent manner, then again, it's if that communication or article that you saw in the newspaper or information you received or just came across or researched is influencing or formulating your opinion or your decisions on a matter that's before this council, then we would always recommend to err on the side of disclosure. If there's any questions, we can certainly handle those exceptions.
Mr. Larson?
And on one item Ms. Prop mentioned, I just want to clarify, staff's been struggling and trying to ferret out listing council members as the sources of questions or not. The same item on referrals. If you send us a list of questions, that's a public record. So disclosing that you're the source of those questions is not really disclosing anything that's private. But I actually think it would be a great discussion with the policy committee at some point on what is the council's preferred practice. We've done it different ways, and it kind of depends on the staff person who does the first draft. And sometimes it stays in, sometimes it's not. I do think some consistency to that pattern would make sense, both for public and council expectations. And so I did want to clarify that sometimes we have listed council members on referrals and questions, sometimes we haven't, and we're trying to figure that out.
Before you leave that, my question would be, before we send it to the policy committee, why not? You're talking about transparency, yada, yada. Why not list who asked the question? What's the downside?
Wanting to make sure the council's all fine with that and not wanting to surprise you.
Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Just to follow up to that, as well as when a council person asks for specific documents, and I noticed in recent meetings, I would ask for some things and it would say Vice Mayor Leonardis asked for these documents. Mayor Spector may have asked for some others. Councilwoman McNutt asked for these documents. So again, it falls along that same principle. Who asked for what, I guess, or who asked what questions?
Well, he didn't come to next step, but this person would say, I think that if we're moving towards even more transparency, noting who asked the question or who requested the document, that to me is a good thing. So now whenever I ask the question or the document, it'll say that.
And the only exceptions to that will be if it's a workload issue, and we'll try to do it. I mean, we have gotten multiple questions from the same council, or from the same question from different council members, and we'll try to incorporate what I sense is the consensus of the council on identifying sources of questions.
Ms. Propp.
As the council might recall, that this isn't an action item, this is a report and informal discussion. So anything that the council wants to take action on should be referred to the manager for either to the policy committee to make recommendations or to come back as sort of a new policy document and take direction to the manager.
If I could possibly cut a
Mr.
step
Larson?
out of that process, it's an issue staff's been evaluating. We will proceed with listing the source of the member who's raised the inquiry unless the council schedules it for policy committee or council discussion otherwise. So it's the direction I'm going as your manager, as your employee, to implement that, and you can, of course, change that at any point.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Going back to the discussion on confidential items, when I first came on this job, it was my understanding that labor, real estate, and legal items were all closed session items, therefore they needed to be confidential. And as I look at this confidential memo on my desk here, there's some labor things on here, and there's some legal things on here, or some real estate things and some legal things, but there's something about the redevelopment agency dissolution that I didn't really find, it should have been on a confidential memo. So I guess going forward, agreeing with what some of the other council members said, a further definition of confidential versus non-confidential, or just sticking to those guidelines, the labor, the real estate matters, and the legal as being confidential, and everything else is public information.
So those categories are the categories under the Brown Act that are restricted for closed session. There are other legal matters that may be subject to the attorney-client privilege. But what I've taken away from what I've heard from the council is a request to make as much public as possible and only use the attorney-client communication process as limited as possible, and when it's strictly is directed at a litigation matter, an opinion, or a course of conduct, and that calls into question the council's decision-making process.
Further questions? Mr. Larson.
I was wondering if the council was willing to engage in more discussion on managing emails that only go to council members and not staff to become part of the public record, or do you want us, staff, to just propose something and see if it works and pilot it for a bit?
What I'm going to suggest is that we put it on the mayor-manager agenda and follow up that way.
Perfect.
Further discussion? All right. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Just going along the lines with what the town manager just said, and I realize the future course of action, but it's not just council members who have emails that may be received on their private emails. I mean, employees might receive emails on their private emails, and technically some of those might be public records as well. So I think we need to tread very cautiously moving forward, or we can open up a big can of worms with this thing.
And not related directly to that, I got some direction, got some understanding tonight. I quite frankly, I'm still having a challenge with the client being the council majority, because at any one moment in time, you don't know who that is. So I don't know how that works. But other than that, any further discussion? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Since you asked that question, I was curious about that point as well. It was my interpretation when I took this job that there's two people that we can talk to on staff directly and share our innermost thoughts with, and that's the town manager and the town attorney. And we have a direct relationship with the town attorney as if that individual is our personal attorney to protect us and to advise us, individually as a body of five, not necessarily collectively, because again, we don't know what the outcome is going to be of a decision. It could be prior to the decision. And I just want to view it more in terms of that. We all have equal access to both the town manager and the town attorney. Individually, collectively as five, the majority after a vote happens, okay, that's when representation could occur in that manner. But prior to a majority vote, it's an individual basis where we are all equal. We all are represented equally individually.
Is that a question or your understanding?
It was my understanding, and on occasion, one of us might have a special circumstance, where we might have a question for the attorney that is not really applicable to the other four council members. Therefore, say we believe we have a conflict of interest or something, and that's not going to be information that's shared. And that's one example. But we might have questions for the town attorney that we want to have in confidence that are not necessarily, I guess it'd be too burdensome to share with the other council members or whatnot, or just not something that you would expect that would be shared. So.
And as I see Ms. McNutt's hand, but I'm going to ask the attorney to respond. What I hear him saying is one council person has a question of the town attorney specific to that council person. And we've just learned that that council person does not have him or herself an attorney-client relationship with the town attorney.
That's correct. And to respond to both Mayor Spector's and Vice Mayor Leonardis' last comments, it's the public entity who's the client. It just acts through the council majority. It's the council that, the public entity as an entity only has doesn't speak for itself. It speaks by its elected officials. So just for clarification. So that's always the challenge, is what happens if a council member has an issue and there is no attorney-client privilege between the attorney and an individual council member. Again, if it is an issue that would put the town at risk, for example, a member of the council shares something with the attorney that they're going to participate in a item on an agenda, and the attorney, after hearing that information, believes that that council member is legally obligated not to participate, then it's incumbent on the attorney to share that notify that council member that that's not privileged information, and that because it puts the public entity, the town, at a risk, that it has to be shared with the majority of the council, because otherwise the council might get sued or might have to rehear a matter, or a matter could be challenged on that basis. So I would caution all of the council members. And again, I think the council, over the short tenure that I've been here, has shown good judgment as to what they share with the attorney and what they might consult their own private counsel with. And just to clarify, is that while each of the council members has a relationship with both of the attorney and the town manager, since we are your direct employees and report to the five of you collectively, there is no attorney-client privilege or any privilege between the town council members and whatever you tell the town manager. That again, if it's something that's disclosed to the town manager that puts the town entity at risk, again, the manager would have that same obligation to disclose it to the majority of the council.
To the majority of the council or to the council?
To the council.
Thank you.
As a whole.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the comment that this definition of who is the client as being the town and so on is not something that is the opinion of our current town manager. That's just, it is the way it is. It was very clear with our previous town manager. It's clear with other attorneys that serve as counsel for other bodies that I've been on, West Valley Sanitation District. I'm sure Mr. Brzezinski can talk about VTA and so on, and other city projects I've been on. So she didn't just make this up. I mean, it is what it is. So we just have to figure out how to understand it and work it within our system of how we each do our work.
Ms. Jensen.
I wasn't going to ask anything, but so Ms. Prop, if there's no individual attorney-client relationship between an individual council member and the town attorney, and the individual council member asks a non-legal question not related to a document marked attorney-client privilege and gets a response from the attorney, I'm assuming that that response can be shared with anybody without violating anything.
That would be correct.
All right, now do we have any further questions? Seeing none, I will thank you all and adjourn this meeting.